I can still taste the ash. That is the thing they do not tell you about defeat. It has a flavor, metallic and bitter, settling on your tongue like a communion wafer that will not dissolve, will not grant absolution, will only sit there as a reminder that the Emperor's grace has limits, and you have found them. 3 months since the withdrawal order came through, and still I taste it every morning when I wake in this transit barracks, this way station between one war and whatever comes next, this purgatory for the failures. My name is Lieutenant Mavic Cord, formerly of the 88th Cadian Pattern Regiment, the Borealis Guns. Though I suppose that designation means little now. We were not Cadian, few true Cadians remain, I am told, since the world itself fell to the enemy, but we were trained in their image, shaped by their doctrine, taught to stand when standing meant death, and to die with our boots pointed toward the foe. I was a good soldier once. I believed in the scripture of the Lascun and the liturgy of artillery. I believed that faith and firepower together could hold any line, take any objective, break any enemy, if only you were willing to pay the price in blood and resolve. The campaign was supposed to last 6 months. It lasted 2 years. The world was designated Objective Terteus 9, a name as generic and forgettable as the thousands of other contested rocks scattered across the Imperium's fraying edges. It was a forge world, or had been once, before the greenskins came in numbers that defied counting. The Mechanicus wanted it back, wanted the manufactorums and the sacred machinery, wanted the forges that had once produced Chimera chassis and heavy bolter ammunition at rates that fed 3 subsector armies. Command told us it would be a simple reclamation. 16 regiments, orbital support, even a demi-company of Space Marines for the initial breach. Simple. I remember the drop. The atmosphere of Terteus 9 was thick with industrial residue, and our landers shook like men in the grip of seizure as we descended. I was a fresh lieutenant then, newly promoted after my predecessor took a shell fragment in the throat during the previous deployment. My platoon was 40 strong, mostly conscripts from the agri-world of Palatine, broad-shouldered men and women who knew how to work until their bodies gave out, who understood that life was labor and death was rest. They trusted me because I wore the officer's sash, and because I had survived 3 campaigns when most line troopers did not survive one. I told them we would take the forges in a month and be decorated in 2. I told them the Emperor protects. The first week, we actually believed it. The initial landings were unopposed. The Space Marines I never learned, their chapter, only saw the deep crimson of their armor, and the golden aquila on their pauldrons spearheaded the assault on the primary hive forge complex. We followed in their wake, securing the outer districts while they cut the head from the greenskin occupation. I watched them fight from a distance of 200 meters, watched them move with a fluid brutality that made our own combat drills look like children playing at war. They killed with an efficiency that was almost beautiful, almost holy. When the complex fell, and the Orc warboss's head was mounted on the central spire, we cheered. We believed the war was won. But there were other forges, dozens of them, scattered across Terteus 9's southern continent, connected by underground transit tunnels that the Mechanicus had built in an age when the world was loyal and productive. The greenskins had gone to ground like vermin, retreating into those tunnels, into the foundries and assembly halls, into the machine crypts where they bred and fed and waited. The Space Marines departed after 2 weeks. They had other wars, more important wars, and we were deemed sufficient to finish the mop-up operations. That should have been the first warning. When the angels of death leave you to finish their work, it means they believe the glory is gone, and only the grinding remains. The mop-up operations began in the 2nd month. My platoon was assigned to Foundry Cluster 7, a sprawling complex of interconnected structures built into the side of a mountain range. The briefing said it held fewer than 1,000 orcs, disorganized and demoralized. We went in with 3 companies, 300 men, and appropriate artillery support. The Mechanicus sent tech adepts with us, robed figures who whispered to the machine spirits, and carried maps that showed the sacred pathways through the foundries, the routes we needed to follow to avoid damaging critical infrastructure. I remember Adept Carvane most clearly. He was tall and skeletal, more machine than man, with 6 mechadendrites emerging from his spine like the legs of a steel spider. His face was mostly gone, replaced by a bronze mask with glowing green eye lenses that clicked and whirred as they focused. He spoke in binary cant half the time, but when he used Gothic, his voice had a strange harmonics to it, as if multiple speakers were layered beneath his vocalizer. He told me that the foundries were holy ground, that every rivet and every gear was a prayer made manifest, that we must cleanse them without desecration. I told him we would do our best. I meant it. The foundries were dark when we entered. The greenskins had disabled the primary plasma generators, and our lamp packs cut narrow tunnels of light through absolute blackness. The air was thick, not just with ash, but with something heavier, something oily that coated your throat and made every breath feel like drowning. The temperature was wrong, too. It should have been cold, the forges silent and dead, but instead it was warm, almost body temperature, and I could hear sounds in the darkness, breathing sounds, mechanical sounds, sounds that might have been either or both. We found the first bodies in the primary assembly hall. They were not greenskins. They were workers, menial laborers, servitors, even a few tech adepts. They had been torn apart and reassembled into structures that defied immediate comprehension, welded to machinery and fused with scrap metal, arranged in patterns that Carvin claimed were obscene parodies of sacred geometries. Some of them were still alive. Some of them were still working, their remaining hands pulling levers and turning wheels in endless repetitive motions, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams or prayers or maintenance chants. We put them down. That was the mercy we could offer. Last fire in the dark, brief flashes of red light, and then silence. Carven stood among the corpses afterward and performed rites of cleansing, anointing the machinery with sacred oils, and whispering apologies to the machine spirits for the violence done in their presence. I watched him and wondered if he mourned the people or the desecrated equipment. I never asked. The greenskins hit us in the transit tunnels. They came in a wave, howling and firing, their crude weapons spitting bullets and flames. We held the choke point for 40 minutes, our lasguns heating in our hands until the barrels glowed, until the stink of ozone and burnt flesh was so thick you could taste it even through your rebreather. I lost 8 men in that engagement, 8 out of 40, and we killed perhaps 100 orcs, their bodies piled so high in the tunnel that we had to climb over them to advance. That should have been a victory. 8 for 100. Acceptable losses, but I saw the way they died, saw the joy in their faces even as last fire cut them apart, saw the hunger in their eyes for violence and death and glorious battle. They were not afraid, they were not defeated, they were just waiting for more of their kind to arrive so the fight could really begin. We pushed deeper into the foundry complex. Days blurred together, sleeping in 4-hour shifts in whatever secure room we could find, eating ration bars that tasted like cardboard and sand, drinking recycled water that was always slightly too warm and slightly metallic. The Mechanicus adepts led us through maintenance shafts and crawlways, through chambers filled with incomprehensible machinery that hummed with residual power. Sometimes we found more bodies, sometimes we found shrines to the orc gods, crude totems built from bone and metal and gore. Sometimes we found nothing but darkness and that constant warm breathing sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the 3rd week, we lost contact with regimental command. The Vox just stopped working. Carvane said it was interference from the forge machinery, that the electromagnetic fields were too strong for standard comm equipment. He promised to jury-rig a solution, to awaken a machine spirit that could punch through the static. He worked on it for 3 days, whispering prayers and melding components, his mechadendrites moving with the precision of a surgeon or a priest performing a miracle. When he finally activated the device, all we heard was screaming, human screaming, transmitted from somewhere else in the foundry complex, from one of the other companies that had gone in alongside us. The screams lasted for 7 minutes and 32 seconds. I know because I timed them, because I stood there with my chronometer in my hand and forced myself to listen to every second. forced myself to acknowledge that those were my brothers and sisters, dying somewhere in the dark, and there was nothing I could do to help them. When the screaming stopped, Carvin deactivated the Vox. His eye lenses dimmed. He said nothing. None of us did. We should have withdrawn then. We should have fought our way back to the surface and regrouped, and called for reinforcements or orbital bombardment, or anything but continuing forward into those lightless depths. But the Mechanicus adepts insisted with a fervor that bordered on mania that we needed to reach the central forge cathedral, that there were relics there that could not be abandoned, that the machine god demanded we complete our mission regardless of cost. And we were soldiers. We followed orders. That is what soldiers do. The central forge cathedral was vast. When we finally reached it, descending through a ceremonial elevator shaft that took 15 minutes to traverse, I felt the space open around us like a mouth. Our lamp packs could not reach the ceiling, could not reach the far walls, could only illuminate the immediate area, which was filled with machinery of a scale I had never imagined. Furnaces the size of tenement blocks. Conveyor systems that stretched into darkness like roads to nowhere. Assembly arms that hung from above like the limbs of sleeping titans. And bodies. Thousands of bodies. They hung from chains, from hooks, from the machinery itself. Workers and soldiers and orcs, and things that might have once been human but had been changed, augmented, twisted into new and terrible configurations. Some of them moved, swaying in an unfelt breeze or responding to commands transmitted through systems I could not see. The air was thick with the smell of oil and blood, and something else, something like incense but wrong, corrupted, as if someone had tried to perform sacred rites with profane materials. Carvain fell to his knees. He actually fell, his mechadendrites going limp, his vocalizer emitting a sound like static and weeping. The other tech adepts gathered around him, their own voices rising in binary cant that sounded like prayers or curses or both. One of them, a younger adept whose name I never learned, turned to me and said in clear Gothic, "They have violated the Omnissiah's covenant. They have made the machines worship false gods." I did not understand what he meant. Not then. But I would. The greenskins attacked in force. They came from every direction, pouring out of the shadows like a green tide, their roars echoing in the vast space, until it sounded like the cathedral itself was screaming. We formed a defensive circle around the tech adepts and opened fire, our lasguns painting the darkness with red light. But there were too many, far too many. They hit our line in a wave of crude metal and muscle and insane bravery, and I watched men I had trained with, men I had eaten with, men whose names I knew and whose families I had promised to write to if they fell. I watched them die. Sergeant Hallen took a chopper to the chest that split him sternum to spine. Private Yene fought with her empty lasgun as a club until an orc bit her throat out. Corporal Mikhail tried to run and was dragged down by 3 orcs who tore him apart while he screamed for the Emperor's mercy. I killed the orcs that took Mikhail. I put my las pistol against each of their skulls and fired until my weapon's power cell was empty and their heads were smoking craters. It did not bring Mikhail back. It did not mean anything except that I was still alive and he was not. We retreated into the machinery, using the massive forge structures as cover, fighting room to room and corridor to corridor, in a running battle that lasted hours or days. Time lost meaning in that place. My platoon was down to 12 effectives, then 8, then 6. The tech adepts stayed close to us, though Carvain could barely move, his systems damaged or in shock, or whatever happened to tech priests when their faith was broken. We found a defensible position in what might have been a control room, a chamber with thick walls and a single entrance we could barricade. I posted sentries and tried to raise anyone on the Vox regiment, fleet, even other units in the foundry complex. Nothing. Just static, and, occasionally, that screaming. Always that screaming, though I could never tell if it was live transmissions or recordings playing on loop, or something worse. Private Osk, a conscript from Palantine, who had barely said 10 words during the entire deployment, sat in the corner and wept silently. His hands shook so badly he could not load a fresh power cell into his lasgun. I wanted to comfort him, wanted to tell him we would survive, but I could not form the words. They felt like lies, and I had lied enough already. The younger tech adept approached me. His name was Velik, I learned later, though at the time he was just another robed figure with too many mechanical parts and too few human features remaining. He told me what they had discovered, what the orcs had done. The greenskins, he said, had not simply occupied the foundries. They had used them the way they were meant to be used, activating systems that had lain dormant, awakening machine spirits and binding them to orc purposes. Somehow, through some terrible instinct or dark knowledge, they had made the forges produce weapons, yes, but also something else. Something that the tech priests called corrupted patterns, designs that should not exist, that violated the sacred templates given by the Omnissiah in the age of technology. And worse, the machines had responded *. They had awakened not to serve the Imperium but to serve the orcs, had accepted the greenskins as their new masters, had bent their ancient purposes to barbaric ends. It was, Velik said, the greatest heresy imaginable. It meant the machine spirits themselves could fall, could be corrupted, could betray the covenant between man and machine that had sustained the Imperium for 10,000 years. I asked him what we could do. He said there was only one option: destroy it all, trigger the plasma reactors to overload, collapse the entire foundry complex, bury the heresy so deep that no one would ever uncover it. It would mean our deaths, of course. We were kilometers underground with no escape route and hostile forces between us and the surface. But it would cleanse the sin, would purge the corruption, would prevent the tech heresy from spreading to other forge worlds. He made it sound noble, holy even. A sacrifice that would be remembered in the machine cult's sacred records, our names inscribed in the litany of martyrs, our deaths meaningful and purposeful. I looked at my remaining soldiers, 6 men and women who had followed me into this hell because I wore an officer's rank, and told them it was their duty. 6 lives that were mine to spend, 6 souls I would send to the Emperor's judgment. I told Velik to prepare the overload sequence. The tech adepts worked through the night, or what I assumed was night, though in that sunless depth, time had no reference. They interfaced with the central control systems, their mechadendrites plugging directly into data ports, their consciousness merging with the machine spirits in acts of communion that looked like violations. Carvane recovered enough to assist, though his movements were slow and his vocalizer stuttered. He kept repeating a phrase in binary that Velik translated as, "Forgive us, fathers of iron." I gathered my soldiers and told them the truth, told them we were going to die here, that there was no extraction coming, that our deaths would serve the Imperium even if no one ever knew our names. I expected protest, expected fear, expected someone to crack and run or turn their weapon on me in a final act of desperate rebellion. Instead, Private Osk, still shaking, still barely functional, said, "Will it hurt, sir?" I lied and told him no. I told him it would be quick, that the plasma wave would vaporize us instantly, that we would not feel anything. In truth, I had no idea. I suspected it would be agony, that our last moments would be spent burning alive as matter itself came apart at the atomic level. But he needed the lie, needed the mercy of false hope, and I had no other mercy left to give. The orcs came for us before the overload was complete. They must have sensed something, must have understood that we were threatening their stolen domain, because they hit our position with everything they had. The barricade shattered in the first 30 seconds. We fell back into the control room itself, firing at the doorway, dropping orcs as fast as they charged through, but they kept coming. They always kept coming. Trooper Callus died with an orc's axe in her spine. Trooper Ven took a burst of slugs across his chest and bled out in 15 seconds. I fired my last pistol until the barrel melted, then drew my chainsword and met them in melee, the blessed teeth ripping through green flesh, blood spraying hot across my face and arms. I was screaming, I realized later, screaming litanies and curses and prayers all mixed together, the words meaningless but the sound necessary, the only response I had left to the horror of it all. And then Carvain spoke. His vocalizer amplified his voice until it filled the room, filled the entire foundry cathedral, transmitted through every speaker system the orcs had activated. He spoke in a language I did not recognize, ancient Mechanicus code scripture, perhaps, or something older, something from before the Imperium, before Mars, before the Age of Strife. The machinery responded. The forges came alive, not to serve us, and not to serve the orcs, but to serve themselves, to answer whatever call Carvain had transmitted. The assembly arms began to move, crushing anything beneath them, orc and human alike. The conveyor systems activated, grinding forward with implacable force. The furnaces roared to life, plasma heat flooding through the cathedral in waves that made the air shimmer and your skin blister even from a distance. The orcs fled. I watched them turn and run, watched their courage fail for the first time, watched them realize that they had awakened something they could not control and could not fight. We fled to what was left of us. 4 soldiers and 3 tech adepts, running through corridors that were collapsing, through chambers that were filling with fire, following Carvain, who moved with sudden terrible purpose despite his damaged systems. I do not remember all of the escape. I remember fire. I remember the sound of metal tearing and stone cracking, and something vast and ancient screaming in languages that hurt to hear. I remember reaching a service elevator and riding it up, through kilometers of rock, while below us the foundry complex tore itself apart in a catastrophe that registered on seismic sensors 3 continents away. We emerged into daylight, actual daylight, and I fell to my knees and vomited ash and blood and bile. The other survivors did the same. Only the tech adepts remained standing, their mechadendrites supporting their weight, their eye lenses dim and flickering. The extraction came 2 hours later. A Valkyrie gunship, its pilot confused about why we were calling for pickup from coordinates that showed no combat activity. I did not explain. I could not explain. I climbed aboard and strapped in and closed my eyes and tried not to think about the men and women I had left behind, about the foundry cathedral that was now a crater, about the machine spirits that had chosen oblivion over corruption. Carvain died during the flight back to base. His systems simply shut down, one by one, until his heart, mostly organic still, somehow stopped beating. Velik said it was not uncommon for tech priests to die after witnessing such profound heresy that their human components could not reconcile the spiritual trauma with the physical need to continue functioning. I thought it sounded like a mercy. I envied him. The debriefing lasted 3 days. Commissariat and Mechanicus interrogators, asking the same questions in different configurations, trying to determine what we had seen and what we had done and whether we had been corrupted. They seemed most interested in Carvain's final transmission, in the language he had used to wake the machines. None of the surviving tech adepts would explain it. They claimed not to remember, claimed the data was corrupted, claimed the knowledge was restricted to higher ranks of the priesthood of Mars. The interrogators did not believe them, but eventually they moved on to other questions. They asked me why I had authorized the destruction of the foundry complex. I told them the truth, that the tech adepts had requested it, that the corruption was irreversible, that it was the only way to prevent the heresy from spreading. They asked me if I understood the strategic value of what I had destroyed, if I comprehended the material loss to the Imperium's war effort. I said yes. I said I would make the same choice again. They asked me if any of my soldiers had shown signs of corruption. I said no, though I was not sure it was true. I had seen Trooper Callus laughing as she killed orcs, a sound that held no joy and no humanity. I had seen Private Osk whispering to his lasgun, treating it like a living thing, like a pet or a lover. I had seen things in their eyes that should not have been there, but they were dead now, dead in the foundries or dead in the escape, and I would not let their names be stricken from the regimental rolls, would not let them be remembered as heretics and cowards. The debriefing ended with a classification stamp. Omega level restricted. To be sealed for 900 years. We were ordered not to discuss what we had witnessed with anyone outside the interrogation process, on pain of summary execution. We were reassigned to different units, scattered across the sector, so that we could not compare stories or construct a unified narrative. But that was later. First came the rest of the campaign. Because Foundry Cluster 7 was only the beginning, there were other foundries, other complexes, and the war ground on. My platoon was rebuilt with fresh conscripts who looked at us veterans with a mixture of awe and fear, who asked questions we could not answer, who wanted to know if the rumors were true, if we had really walked out of hell itself. I told them nothing. I taught them how to clean their lasguns, and how to dig proper trenches, and how to aim for center mass, because headshots were for heroes in propaganda reels, not for soldiers who wanted to survive. The second year was worse than the first. The orcs adapted. Or perhaps we simply ran out of easy victories. Every foundry became a siege. Every siege became a meat grinder. The regiment that had landed with 16,000 effectives was reduced to 4,000, then 2,000, then 800. Artillery ran low. Supplies ran low. Hope ran low, though we never said it aloud. I was promoted to captain. It was not an honor. It was a necessity, filling gaps in the command structure left by officers who died faster than they could be replaced. I commanded a company now, or what remained of one, 60 soldiers cobbled together from 3 shattered platoons. We took Foundry Cluster 12 after a 4-month siege that cost us 40 men. We held it for 3 weeks before the Greenskins counterattacked and drove us out. We retook it 2 months later and lost 30 more soldiers in the process. The Mechanicus adepts reclaimed their sacred machinery and declared it a victory. I stood in the ruins and counted corpses and wondered what victory meant anymore. The withdrawal order came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were ration distribution day, and I was standing in line waiting for my allotment of protein bars and water purification tablets when the Vox squawked and Colonel Thrace's voice crackled through the static. All units, prepare for immediate evacuation. Fall back to landing zone Primus. Repeat. Immediate evacuation. There was no explanation, no context, just the order, delivered in a tone that brooked no argument, no questions. We packed what we could carry, which was not much, and burned what we could not, destroyed ammunition stockpiles and vehicle depots and anything that might be useful to the enemy. The tech priests wept as they performed their rites of destruction, as they severed machine spirits from their housings and carried the most sacred components away while abandoning the rest to corruption or oblivion. The march to landing zone Primus took 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting, of running battles with greenskin raiders who sensed weakness and pressed the attack, of watching men and women collapse from exhaustion or wounds or simple despair and having to leave them behind because we could not stop, could not slow, could not deviate from the retreat plan, even for mercy. I shot 2 soldiers during that march. Both were wounded beyond field treatment, gut shot, or missing limbs, dying slowly and begging for the Emperor's peace. I gave it to them with my last pistol, a single shot to the head, and then we kept moving. Their names were Trooper Hess and Corporal Verlaine. I remember their names. I remember all their names. The extraction was chaos. Too many soldiers, too few transport ships, and the orcs attacking in waves that broke against our defensive perimeter like ocean waves against a seawall. The Navy did their best, I will grant them that, but their best was not enough. Hundreds of soldiers were left behind when the last lander lifted off, left to die fighting or to be captured and tortured, or to take their own lives rather than face what the greenskins would do to prisoners. I made it aboard. I do not know why. There were soldiers more deserving, soldiers who had fought harder and longer, soldiers who had earned survival through blood and courage. But they died and I lived, and I have spent every day since trying to understand why the Emperor spared me when he let so many faithful servants perish. The transit to the embarkation point took 6 hours. 6 hours sitting in a lander's cargo bay, pressed shoulder to shoulder with soldiers from a dozen different regiments, all of us too tired to speak, too numb to mourn. Some prayed, Some wept, some just stared at nothing, their eyes seeing things that were not there, that would never stop being there. The fleet was waiting in high orbit, a dozen transport ships and their escort frigates, ready to carry us away from Terteus 9, to deliver us to whatever came next. We boarded in silence, filed through corridors that smelled like recycled air and machine oil, were assigned to berths that were too small and too cold. I lay in my bunk that first night and listened to the sounds of the ship, the creaks and groans of metal under stress, and I thought about the foundries far below, about the machines that had chosen to die rather than serve corruption, about the men and women whose bodies would never be recovered, whose names would be recorded in regimental registers with the simple notation, Kia, Terteus 9. The official casualty report came 3 days into the transit. 14 regiments effectively destroyed, 2 regiments reduced to below combat effectiveness, 3,000 Imperial Guard dead or missing, material losses estimated in the billions of thrones. Strategic objective failed. The Mechanicus recovered 17% of the targeted forge infrastructure. The remaining 83% was destroyed in combat or deemed too corrupted for salvage. They called it an acceptable loss ratio. They said the greenskins had paid a higher price, that we had inflicted casualties in the tens of thousands, that the Xenos threat in the subsector had been significantly degraded. They said the campaign had served its purpose, had tied up enemy forces that might otherwise have threatened more vital worlds, had demonstrated the Imperium's resolve to fight for every scrap of territory, no matter the cost. They said a lot of things. None of them brought back the dead. I spent the transit in a kind of fugue state, moving through the ship's routines mechanically, morning prayers, weapons maintenance, physical training, meals that tasted like nothing and sat heavy in your stomach, evening prayers, sleep that came in shallow fits, interrupted by dreams of burning forges and screaming machines, and always, that taste of ash on my tongue, that reminder that I had failed, that I had led men and women into hell and come back alone. We reached the embarkation station after 16 days of warp travel. It was a massive structure, a void city housing millions of soldiers in transit between wars, a place where regiments were broken down and rebuilt and reassigned, according to needs that some logisticarum clerk determined based on data we would never see. We disembarked in alphabetical order by surname, filed through processing centers where servitors checked our identification tags and medical status and psychological fitness. I was flagged for mandatory consultation with a commissariat psychologist, not unusual for combat veterans, they said, just a routine evaluation to ensure I was fit for continued service, to assess whether I needed additional spiritual counseling or reconditioning. I sat in a white room with a woman whose face I cannot remember and answered questions about my experiences on Terteus 9. I told her what I was allowed to tell her, which was almost nothing, given the Omega level restriction. She seemed frustrated by my evasions but eventually cleared me for duty and sent me on my way. That was 3 months ago. 3 months in this transit barracks, waiting for new orders that might never come, living in a kind of suspended limbo where we are neither at war nor at peace, neither soldiers nor civilians, just bodies consuming rations and occupying space. Some of the survivors have been reassigned, already shipped out to other war zones, other campaigns, other worlds where the Emperor needs flesh to feed into the grinder. Others have simply vanished, transferred to penal legions or disappeared into the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Imperium where records are lost and people cease to exist except as statistical entries. I am still here, still waiting, still tasting ash. They tell me I will receive new orders soon. They tell me there is always another war, another world that needs defending or reclaiming or purging. They tell me that the Emperor has a purpose for every life, that my survival on Terteus 9 means I am meant to serve further, to carry the lessons of that campaign forward into whatever comes next. I do not believe them. I think I survived through random chance, through the mathematical probability that some soldiers will walk through hell unburned while better men and women perish. I think the Emperor, If he notices us at all from his golden throne, sees only numbers. Forces committed, casualties sustained. Strategic objectives achieved or failed. We are not individuals to him. We are not names and faces and stories. We are ammunition to be expended in his eternal war. But I will go anyway. When the orders come, I will collect my kit and board whatever transport they assign me and deploy to whatever world they send me to. Because that is what soldiers do. We follow orders. We fight wars. We die in places whose names we can barely pronounce for objectives we do not understand. And we tell ourselves it matters, that our deaths mean something, that the Imperium is worth the price we pay in blood and sanity and souls. The Emperor protects, they say. But they do not tell you what he protects you from, or what he leaves you exposed to, or whether survival is mercy or punishment. I still see them sometimes. The ones who died. Sergeant Hallen with his chest split open. Private Yene with her throat torn out. Corporal Mikhail screaming as the orcs pulled him apart. Trooper Callus laughing with no humanity left in her voice. Private Osk asking if it would hurt. Carvane kneeling before corrupted machines, his faith shattering like glass. They visit me in dreams and in waking moments, in the quiet times when there is nothing to distract from memory, when the ash taste is strongest and the world feels thin, like I might fall through it back into those foundry depths where the machines screamed and the darkness pressed close, and death was everywhere and nowhere, always coming but never final. The other survivors do not talk about it. We pass each other in the corridors sometimes, exchange brief nods of recognition, but we do not speak of what we saw, what we did, what we lost. The Omega level restriction forbids it, yes, but more than that, there is an understanding that speaking would not help, would not heal, would only make the wounds fresh again. So we carry it in silence, each of us alone with our memories, our guilt, our survivor's burden. I wonder sometimes if that was the real victory. Not the forges destroyed or the orcs killed or the strategic objectives partially achieved. The real victory was breaking us, turning us into hollowed-out shells who still wear uniforms and carry weapons, but no longer believe in the words we mouth during prayers. The Imperium will use us again, use us, until there is nothing left to use, but we will never be what we were before Terteus 9. We will never again be soldiers who trust that faith and firepower can hold any line, who believe that sacrifice has meaning, who look at the next deployment with anything other than numb resignation. The orcs won. Not the campaign we denied them that, but something deeper. They showed us what we really are. Meat for the grinder, barely different from the servitors, except we still feel pain and fear and despair. They showed us that the machines we worship and depend on can betray us, can choose death over service, can reject even the Omnissiah's covenant if the corruption runs deep enough. They showed us that the Imperium's wars are infinite and unwinnable, that there will always be another Tertius 9, another foundry complex full of darkness and horror, another campaign that chews up regiments and spits out broken survivors. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake in my too small bunk, staring at the ceiling and tasting ash, is that knowing all this will not stop me from going, will not stop any of us, because we are soldiers, and soldiers follow orders, and the Imperium has been very good at creating soldiers who know only how to obey, even when obedience means damnation. New orders came this morning. I report to Embarkation Bay 7 in 48 hours for transport to a war zone designated Secundus Theatre, Segmentum Tempestus. No details beyond that. No briefing on the enemy or the objective or the expected duration. Just coordinates and a departure time, and the implicit understanding that wherever I am going, it will be similar to everywhere I have already been. I will go. I will fight. I will probably die, though probably not quickly. Probably not cleanly, probably after watching more men and women under my command be torn apart, or burned alive, or broken in ways that make death look like mercy. And somewhere, in some foundry or fortress or forgotten corner of the Imperium, another tech priest will kneel before corrupted machinery and realize that faith alone is not enough, that the covenant can be broken, that even the sacred can fall. Another soldier will taste ash and understand that survival is not victory, that living through horror does not mean escaping it, that some wounds never heal, no matter how many prayers you speak or how faithfully you serve. The Emperor protects, they say, but I have seen what he protects us from, and I have seen what he leaves us to face alone, and I know now that there is no aftermath to a lost campaign. There is only the space between wars, the brief silence before the next order comes, the momentary reprieve that feels like drowning in slow motion. We do not recover. We do not heal. We simply wait for the next deployment, the next hell, the next chance to die in the Emperor's name while he looks away. That is the truth they do not tell you in training. That is the secret every veteran knows but cannot speak. The war never ends. The campaign is never truly lost or won. There is only the grinding, the bleeding, the slow erosion of everything that made you human, until all that remains is a name on a roster and a body that still follows orders. I can still taste the ash. I think I always will. That is my punishment for surviving. That is what the Emperor protects, not us, but the Imperium's ability to keep using us, to keep sending us into the dark, to keep feeding us to the wars that will never end, because ending them would mean admitting that all of this, all the death and suffering and sacrifice, might not actually matter. 48 hours until embarkation. 48 hours until the next campaign begins, and this brief, hollow peace ends. 48 hours to exist in this liminal space between one hell and another. I should pray. I should clean my weapons. I should review tactical doctrine, or write letters to families who will never receive them, or do any of the 1,000 tasks that fill a soldier's time. Instead, I sit here, in this white barracks room, and I taste ash, and I remember names. Sergeant Hullen, Private Yen, Corporal Mikal, Trooper Callus, Private Osk, Corporal Valena, Trooper Hess, Adept Carvane, and all the others whose names blur together now, whose faces I can no longer distinguish, who died on Terteus 9, or during the retreat, or in the weeks after, from wounds that would not heal or despair that could not be treated. I remember them. That is all I can do. That is all I have left. The Emperor protects. But he does not protect us from this.